Good morning, everyone. My name is Ankit, and we all know that current affairs is at the very DNA of UPSC exam preparation. Now, why I said DNA? Because current affairs requires you to put a lot of effort in the exam, and it is also asked quite prominently in the prelims as well as mains examination. Now, we all know also that the best source for current affairs are the daily newspapers such as Hindu, Indian Express, and also few government sites such as PIB. So, in that regards, we'll be starting our very own daily newspaper analysis from today onwards. And the purpose of this analysis is to help you understand current affairs, because only after you know current affairs in a very different manner, it will help you first of all understand, apply the current affairs knowledge, and then assimilate the current affairs into your daily preparation. So, in that regard, I'll be covering three important sources: the Hindu newspaper, Indian Express, as well as PIB in this session. And after the session end, I will upload the notes on this particular Telegram channel. So, please make sure to subscribe to this channel, as you'll find the notes on a daily basis on this very channel. So, without any further ado, let us start our today's discussion. Now, the first article, as you can see, I have taken from the Hindu newspaper, and this article deals with the Conference of Parties 29th meeting, which occurred in the city of Baku, that is in Azerbaijan, and this concluded in the month of November, that was last month. Now, the whole editorial section of the Indian Express is filled with the articles related to COP29. So, I have taken up this article as this completely summarizes the summit in a very detailed manner and also gives us everything what we need from the COP29 perspective. So, as you can see, also this topic is important from GS paper 3 syllabus. Now, you must have heard that the climate change is the biggest threat that is faced to humankind. Now, cognizant of this fact, nations got together in order to limit the global increase in temperatures across the globe, which is commonly known as global warming. Now, cognizant of this fact, many nations in the year 2015, under the aegis of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in its Paris meeting, agreed on some set of legally binding agreement. To summarize, the nations, they agreed to limit the temperatures of global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. But this was not enough. So, what the nations did? That they also agreed to make efforts to limit the increase of temperature only up till 1.5 degrees centigrade. The lesser increase in global warming, the more it is better. So, in this regard, the meetings subsequent to the Paris meeting in the year 2015, they were all in a way directed towards one thing, so as to achieve the target set during the Paris meeting. And in this regard, let us understand what are the key takeaways of the 29th meeting. Now, the Paris meeting was called COP21. So, you can understand there has been 8 different meetings until or including the COP29. Now, the key demands since the Paris climate change event has been from the developing countries. Now, developing countries, they say that although developed countries historically have emitted more amount of greenhouse gases, and they have also reaped the fruit of developments in the past. Now, for the developing countries, it is their time to undertake mass scale industrial development. But on the other hand, you can understand that industrial development also requires you to emit large amount of greenhouse gases, be it power generation, be it transportation and logistics. Each and every sector emits a large amount of greenhouse gases. And because of that, the developing countries, although agreeing on the fact that world needs to be saved from global warming, they say that to undertake economic development in line with Paris principles, they need large amount of money. How much? $1.3 trillion every year until the year 2035. So this has been the key demand from developing countries. And the developing countries are seeking these funds from developed countries, which in otherwise are mentioned in the Annexure 1 of the Paris Agreement. Understood? Now, in this regard, there have been negotiations back and forth between the developed countries and developing countries. And in this regard, let us understand what are the key achievements of the COP29 meet. Now, the first most important event or the agreement in the COP29 was that developed countries, they agreed to pay not $1.3 trillion, but $300 billion annually till 2035. Also, there has been what you can call carbon markets. Now, what are carbon markets? I'll explain it to you very briefly. Now, suppose there is a country A which emits 200 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year. Now, under the Paris Agreement, the country A is permitted to emit 400 gigatons of CO2 every year. So, you can understand the country A is performing well because it is emitting 200 gigatons of CO2 less than what is required. So, it can sell its excess 200 gigatons of CO2 to another country, which is called a carbon market. Now, the same principle is applicable not just to nations, but also to individual private companies as well. That first of all, private companies are given a set target of how much they can at max emit CO2 emissions, and if they emit less amount of CO2 emissions, the residual amount they can sell it to another company, and in return they'll get funds. So this is what carbon markets is all about. Now, there was this agreement on carbon market which was concluded in this very event that highlighted both bilateral agreements on carbon markets as well as private agreements between individual companies. Further, there were this new emission pledges from many nations as well, be it countries like Canada or Mexico, which are large emitter of greenhouse gases, and it also included countries like Indonesia, which is world's largest producer of coal. So, because of new emission pledges by these countries which have preponed their emission targets, it will help achieve the global emission reduction targets which was already envisaged in the Paris Agreement. Understood? Now, let us understand what are the key issues related to the global warming and UFCCC negotiations. Now, the first key issue, as you can see, is the amount of finances provided. Now, if you can recall, originally the developing countries, they demanded $1.3 trillion. But how much was paid by developed countries? Only $300 billion. That is $1 trillion less than what is required. Now, developing countries need these many funds to undertake developments, be it upscaling their renewable energy or undertaking construction of infrastructure which is able to withstand the changes of climate change. So, all this requires large amount of money which according to developing countries are not being fulfilled by the developed countries. Further, the developing countries, they demanded for funds from public sources. That is, one government should give the fundings as a grant or loan to another countries. But on the other hand, we have seen that most of the financing which is agreed upon in COP29 will come not from public but private sources. So this is a cause of concern because you can understand private sources, they only invest money where they can get back higher investment for their returns. However, public funding does not take into account the amount of returns. And this is where you can understand naturally most of the investment will go to economically productive countries and not so less developed countries, which are in a way more needy for the climate finances. Understood? So this was key takeaways for COP 29. And with this, we move to second article of the day, which appeared in the text and context section of the Hindu newspaper. Now, this newspaper article highlights the features of Places of Worship Act, which was enacted in the year 1991. Now, why this act is in news? It is because in few days back, a violence occurred in the city of Sambal, which is located in Uttar Pradesh. There is this Shahi Jama Masjid in Sambal area, and petitioners from the Hindu side, they demanded that this Jama Masjid was rather created by Mughal Emperor Babur after demolition of a Hindu temple. And they asked the court whether they can access to the site to gain evidences of the previous existing Hindu temple. Now, after court gave permission for conduction of a survey, it resulted into a large-scale violence in the city of Sambal, which also resulted into death of 4 persons. And this is why it has been in news for the past 10 days or so. Now, in this regard, why is these Places of Worship Act not been able to control the violence? And this is the subject of our today's discussion. Now, before going into why, let us first understand what is the Places of Worship Act. Now, this Places of Worship Act was enacted in the times of Babri Masjid dispute, which happened in early 90s, and this act was enacted by the government of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. Now, the intention of this act was originally to preserve the secular character of India's constitution and Indian society in general. So, to do that, this act provided for preservation of character of a place of worship as it existed on the date of India's independence, that is 15th of August 1947. Now, what do you mean by preservation of character of place of worship? Suppose there is a mosque which existed in this particular date. Now, after India's independence, conversion of this mosque into a temple or into a church or into a gurudwara was prohibited. Also, this act prohibits the court from examining whether any place of worship has been altered since that particular date. So, if there is a claim that says that earlier there used to exist a mosque and after this particular date, that is of India's independence, it was changed into a temple, a church or a gurudwara, that court will not examine into that particular claim. Also, section 3 of this act forbid the conversion of a place of worship, whether part conversion or whole conversion, into any another denomination, or not just religious denomination but also within the subsects of a similar religious denomination. But there was this important caveat, and what was that? That this act excluded the dispute of Ram Janmabhoomi and Babri Masjid as it was under the judiciary's consideration back then. So, this is remotely what Places of Worship Act is all about. Now, why this Places of Worship Act has not been able to control violence that we have seen recently in Sambal and previously in Gyanvapi Mosque that is located in the city of Varanasi. Now, there are many reasons to that, because a dominant section of society, it feels that certain act, that is the Places of Worship Act, it prevents the followers of a particular religion in reclaiming their religious sites from hitherto original sites that were existing back then. Now, the petitioners say that especially during the rules of Delhi Sultanate and Mughal Sultanate, there was this increasing incidences where the temples, they were destroyed by the rulers and over them the mosques were constructed. And this act has prevented the people in reclaiming their original religious sites, which has been the case in Gyanvapi Mosque also. And this was the case in Shahi Jama Masjid, which is located in Sambal. Further, Justice Chandrachud, who recently retired as the Chief Justice of India, back during the hearing of petition of Gyanvapi Mosque, he made a certain remark. And he said that although changing the nature of religious places is barred under the Places of Worship Act, however, this act permits the ascertainment of a religious character of a place as a possessional instrument which may or may not necessarily foul with the original provisions of the act. Now, what does this particular statement means? It means that there are two facets of a religious place, that is changing the character, which is prohibited by the Places of Worship Act, and determination or fact finding of whether this place was originally belonged to religion A or religion B. It is permitted under the Places of Worship Act. So this was the statement that was made by Justice Chandrachud back when he was a judge in the Supreme Court, and this has been used by various trial courts in the country to give permission for conduction of survey into various mosques across the country, and this has been the bone of contention. Understood? Now let us practice our knowledge with this practice question. Now consider the following statements with respect to religious places. Statement 1. Part or whole conversion of a place of worship constructed before the independence is prohibited in India. This is a correct statement because Places of Worship Act of the year 1991 in its section 3 prohibits the conversion, be it part conversion or a whole conversion of a place of worship which was constructed before the independence of India. Understood? Now moving to the second statement. Places of Worship Act, it preserves the character of a place of worship as it existed before the commencement of the act. Now pay close attention to this statement. It says commencement of the act. Now this act was enacted in the year 1991. So the commencement of this act took place in 1991. So do you think this act preserves the character of a place of worship before 1991? The answer is no. So what if a place was constructed in the year 1980? Will the character of this place be preserved according to this act? No, right? Because this act highlighted the date was August 15, 1947. So the second statement here is incorrect. So which of the following statements in respect to the above statement is correct? We will go with option C, that says statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect. Now let us move to another article which also appeared in the text and context section of the Hindu newspaper. Now this article is about the recent granting of pardon by President Joe Biden to his own son. You understand how much audacity it must have taken place that a sitting president has pardoned any crimes that may have happened by his own son. Now in this regard, the powers of President of United States in granting pardon is absolute. That is, the President of United States can grant pardon before the trial has taken place and even before the conviction has taken place. So this is an absolute power. Now from our UPSC's own perspective, what is more important, that how the granting of pardon is provided in the Indian political system, or rather what our constitution speaks about it. So in this regard, let us understand what are the pardoning powers of Indian president. Now, Now, the powers of Indian President are provided under the Article 72 of the Indian Constitution, which gives President the power to grant pardon, commutation, remission, respite, and reprieve to a convict. And also, a similar power is provided to the governor of states under the Article 161 of the Indian Constitution. Now, there are 5 different versions of pardons, that is pardon, commutation, respite, reprieve, and remission. Understood? Now, pardon is, suppose a convict is undergoing a death sentence or a life sentence. Now, when the president or the governor pardons a convict suffering from life sentence or a death sentence, that convict is free to go after the pardon. Now, coming to a commutation. Now, commutation means reduction in the quality of sentence or the conviction. Suppose a prisoner is under the sentence of a death sentence. Now, what if the president or governor converts this death sentence into a life imprisonment, which means the character of the sentence has been reduced, and this is what commutation is all about. Now, let us talk about remission. Now, whenever the quality of sentence remains the same, but the duration of imprisonment or the sentence is reduced, it is called as remission. Suppose a prisoner is under 2 years of rigorous imprisonment. Now, this rigorous imprisonment has been lessened to just a period of 1 year. However, the rigorous imprisonment remains and it is not converted into a normal imprisonment. So, reducing the duration of sentence while retaining the character of sentence is what remission is all about. Now, respite, it comes into play under special circumstances. Now, what happens if a convict becomes a mental health patient, or a woman convict undergoes a pregnancy? So, under such special circumstances, the quantum and the quality of sentences is reduced. It is called as respite. Now, coming to reprieve. As the name suggests, it is just a temporary relief, which means if a convict has to take further legal course which is available to him or her, then that convict can seek a temporary reprieve from the president or governor. So, these are the 5 pardons which are available to both president and governor according to Article 72 and Article 161 of the Indian Constitution respectively. Now, it is also important to note this is not a discretionary power of the president or the governor. Rather, this power, it is exercised only after the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Understood? So, president himself or herself cannot determine what the kind of pardon, commutation or other available legal benefit should be given to convict. Rather, it is the sovereign decision which is made by the Council of Ministers. Now, another question may arise, are these powers absolute for the Indian president as it was the case for US president? The answer is no. Why? Because the Supreme Court of India, in the Supreme Court judgment of the year 2006, that is Epuru Sudhakar case, highlighted that the exercise of pardoning power is subjected to judicial review. Now, if the president makes the decision on an arbitrary ground or with a mala fide intention, which means an intention to create deceit, or under extraneous considerations which does not take into account certain facts which are relevant for the case, so in that case the Supreme Court can consider or re-examine the decision made by the President of India. So, this was the pardoning power of India's president. So, let us practice another practice question. if the President of India exercises his power as provided under the Article 72, which means pardoning power of the President, then which of the following statements is incorrect? Pay close attention. You have to identify the incorrect statement. So, one among these four statements are incorrect. So, let us solve this question. Now, the President has the power to pardon a death sentence, which is correct, because President can pardon a death sentence, but on the other hand, the governor of a state, he or she cannot. Another statement, the President can pardon sentences inflicted by court martial, which is again correct, because President has a wider power of pardoning, which is not available to the governor. Hence, governor cannot pardon a sentence which is inflicted by court martial. Coming to the third statement, the powers of President shall be exercisable by or under the aid and advice of Council of Ministers, which again is correct, as I have highlighted here. It is a sovereign power, so it is not a discretionary power of the President. Coming to the last statement, the power of President under Article 72 is absolute and cannot be questioned in a court of law. Now, this statement is incorrect. Why? Because the Supreme Court in the year 2006 in Epru Sudhakar case highlighted that in case President makes the decision under mala fide intention, under extraneous circumstances, or under arbitrary grounds, so in that case the Supreme Court can review the decisions made by the President, or in other words, the power of President under Article 72 is not absolute, rather it is subjected to judicial review. So, as the statement D is incorrect and this question asks us to identify incorrect statement, that is why option D is the right answer. Now, moving to another newspaper, that is the Indian Express, and we have taken this article written by a famous international relations scholar, that is Mr. C. Raja Mohan. Now, every Wednesday in the Indian Express, you will be able to find the commentary made by C. Raja Mohan under the section called Raja Mandala. And it is quite important from UPSC's perspective, because you can understand the GS paper to syllabus highlights the international relations subject. Now, this article is in relations to President Trump accession to the office of President of United States and its challenges which will be faced by India in this regard. Now, like every political leader, Mr. Trump wants what's best for his own country, that is United States. But you're forgetting one fact, that Mr. Trump is not just like another political leader. He's rather more ruthless and more transactional in nature. So, in this regard, President Trump has threatened the BRICS nations in case they create alternatives to US dollar. So, this is Mr. Trump acting in his own character, which he did in his first tenure between 2016 and 2020. Now, in this regard, what is more important for UPSC's perspective is the existing predominance of US dollar and the reasons why the US dollar has been on a decline. Now, let us first understand why there is a predominance of US dollar across the world, and there are three reasons to it. First is a medium of exchange. That is, across the world, trades happens in goods and services, and most of these trades, they are paid for in US dollars because it is a widely accepted currency throughout the world. So, US dollar first of all acts as a medium of exchange in form of goods and services. So, as to pay for your goods and services, traders across the world rely on US dollars. Now, another importance of US dollar is that it is used as a store of value. Now, you can understand countries like India, Singapore and other important countries, they have foreign currency reserves or forex reserves. And most of these reserves are held in external currencies, predominantly US dollars, but it also has other currencies such as pound sterling, yen, renminbi. And the third reason for the predominance of US dollars is that it is used as a unit of account. That means determination of one currency, say for example rupee, happens in terms of how much rupee you need to pay for $1. And this is the reason why there has been a predominance of US dollars across the world. But in last few years, there have been reasons for many countries to reduce their dependence on dollars. And why is though? Because first of all, as we saw during the Russia-Ukraine war, US imposed several and severe sanctions on the country of Russia, which hampered the Russia's ability to use or transact in US dollars. So this significantly impacted Russia in economic terms, because for whatever imports and exports Russia was making, it was not able to accept or to pay in US dollars. So in that reason, most of the current countries, including India and Russia, they relied on their own local currencies for foreign trade. And this also in a way undermined the US dollar. Because you may have heard that India is trying to internationalize its currency, which means using Indian rupee for external trade purposes, which you can understand in a way will also undermine the US dollar, and this is the challenge of President Trump. Also, in cases such as global warming, global wars, which is happening across many nations, there has been increased preferences for gold as a commodity, because gold has an inherent value, which is not the case with local currencies, because these currencies are fiat currencies which do not have an underlying value. On the other hand, gold is a very popular commodity used across the world, be it for storage purposes, hold of wealth, or for ornamental purposes. That is why, for all these three reasons, US dollar has been on a decline. Another, let us understand what are the challenges of President Trump presidency for India, that we witnessed in his previous term also, that President Trump is quite ruthless and transactional in nature, which means he means India to pay or to let US do something in order to reciprocate for benefits also. So in that rate, Trump has threatened for imposition of tariffs on many countries, which also includes India. And even in his previous tenure, President Trump imposed tariffs on Indian exports to US, such as steel as well as aluminum. Further, this imposition of tariffs has a potential to decline India's export to US, because currently US is India's largest trading partner, because approximately $120 billion worth of trade happens between these two countries every year, and India, as against other countries, has a trade surplus with US, which is almost $35 billion. Now, what is trade surplus? Which means India exports to US more than it imports from US. This is trade surplus, and that is $35 billion in case of India. Another one challenge is the withdrawal of existing benefits. Now, earlier, United States provided India with benefits under the GSP program, which is Generalized System for Preferences. And under this program, countries such as India and other developing countries, the goods that were exported into US from these countries were subjected to less amount of tariffs, and in some cases even no tariffs. So you can understand these products in US were more competitive rather than from products of developed countries, which means more exports. So after withdrawal of these benefits, you can understand it will also hamper India's exports to US. I'm sorry. Now, Another challenge is that President Trump demands frequently reciprocal access to domestic markets. Now, in his previous term, President Trump demanded for easy access to Harley Davidson motorcycles, and in this term, you can expect President Trump to demand similar access for Tesla vehicles, which you can understand will hamper India's EV industry because of increased competition from products across the Atlantic. So these are the set of challenges that India will face in cases of Trump's impending presidency of the United States. Now with this, we move to next article, which also appeared in the explain section of the Indian Express newspaper. And this article highlights the United Kingdom has brought a recent bill which favors assisted dying. Now this news article is important from polity syllabus, that is GS paper 2. Now what is assisted dying? Now assisted dying is a process where a patient who has been suffering from a life-threatening disease can end their own life with assistance of doctors or healthcare professionals. Now there are two aspects of this assisted dying. One is called active euthanasia, which means whenever a person who is suffering from a terminal disease and under active euthanasia, the doctor or the healthcare professional will administer a life-threatening or a life-taking medicine to the patient. And because of this assistance, the patient will die. This is active euthanasia. And there is another aspect called passive euthanasia, which means a patient who is already on a life support system. So that means that patient cannot live without a life support system. So what if the doctors were to support or to stop giving the life support system? So in that case, if the doctors or healthcare professional, they stop offering life support system to the patient dies. So this is called passive euthanasia, that you remove the life support system. On the other hand, active euthanasia is that you administer a lethal drug to the patient which results into his or her death. So this assisted dying is a contentious issue. Why? Because first of all, you can understand patients who are suffering from terminal diseases like cancer or neurological diseases, their quality of life declines significantly, which means that they have an insurmountable amount of suffering. So to end this suffering and enable them to go from this world in a humane way is why people favor assisted dying. Also, we have seen that many terminal patients, they often commit suicide by taking their own life. So to prevent this disregard to their human indignity and also to prevent them from committing suicide, people are advocating for assisted dying and the legal ability of a person to commit to assisted dying. However, there is also another side of this argument. That is, it is prone to misuse, especially if the person is an elderly person or a person is suffering from some kind of disability. Because in that case, an elderly person or a person with disability is a huge responsibility for their family members. So in order to circumvent their responsibilities, the family members, they can say or they can misguide the patient in order to undertake assisted dying to alleviate their concerns, which according to some is a wrong phenomena. Now let us understand what is the situation related to assisted dying in India. Now Supreme Court in the year 2018 highlighted that the right to die with dignity, which is assisted death, is a part of right of life under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. For those who you don't know, Article 21 is a part of fundamental rights that exist in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Now, Supreme Court recognized the legality of passive euthanasia. That Supreme Court said that under special circumstances, if the patient has already consented to undertake of passive euthanasia, or when the family consents, and in certain cases the healthcare professionals give their approval, the patient can undergo passive euthanasia, which means passive euthanasia under some circumstances is allowed in India. But same cannot be said about active euthanasia. That Supreme Court has said that active euthanasia continues to be prohibited under India's constitutional and legal provisions. Understood? So this was UK's assisted dying bill. And let us solve a practice question which I have curated exactly on the lines of previous year question. Now, right to die with dignity is protected as an intrinsic part of right to life and personal liberty. Which of the following in the Constitution of India correctly and appropriately implies the above statement? Now read this question carefully, and I'll expect each and every one of you to answer the correct answer in the comment section down below. Even after this live session ends, you can answer this question in the comment section and it will just take 5 to 10 seconds worth of effort from your side. Now let us move to another article which appeared in 2 pages of the Indian Express newspaper. That is, it is in a way a critical evaluation of the PLI scheme, which is important from GS paper 3 syllabus. Now you can understand India is looking to increase the predominance of manufacturing in its own economy. That is, first of all, India wants to make manufacturing a dominant economic activity. That is, by increasing the share of manufacturing in India's GDP, which currently hovers around 17 to 18% of its GDP, to 25%. And another intention of the government is to create more and more jobs in the manufacturing sector, which will enable our economy to absorb increasingly or existing workforce from the agricultural sector into the manufacturing sector. Understood? So these are the 2 objectives of Indian government since past few years. So to implement or to make this objective a reality, government came up with the PLI or production linked incentive scheme. Now this production linked incentive scheme has been a flagship scheme for Government of India. However, according to today's news article, the result of this scheme so far has been a mixed bag. That let us first understand the key features of this scheme. Now this scheme is an outcome based scheme, which means the benefits of this scheme will be extended to companies only after it results into increase of production. Understood? Now this benefits are in form of incentives which are given in case of incremental production. Now what is this incremental production? Suppose a factory used to manufacture 1 lakh mobile phones every year. Now after this factory or the company enrolled for the PLI scheme, and after the enrollment the production increased to 1.5 lakh mobiles every year. So what do you think? The incentives will be available to the entire 1.5 lakh mobiles or just a part of this? The answer is the incentive will be available only to 50,000 mobiles which has been produced after the enrollment into the scheme, that is on the incremental production. Now the scheme or the benefits of this scheme is available to companies in as many as 14 sectors. Now, why the article highlights that the results have been mixed? Now, the article highlights that the results or the most well performing sectors are the one such as mobile phone manufacturing. Case in point, the manufacturing of iPhones. Now, before this scheme came into fruition, India was a net importer of mobile phones. But after this scheme, India last year exported mobile phones worth of $15 billion. And as many as 20% of iPhones production across the world now happens in our very own country. So this has been the most important benefit of PLI scheme. Further, according to the article, pharmaceutical sector, as India is a pharmaceutical hub which manufactures large amount of medicines and exports them to developed countries, that has also seen benefits, and so does the food processing sectors because of the PLI scheme. However, according to the article, the benefits are not that good in the sectors such as textile as well as auto and auto component sectors. Now, these sectors are very important as far as job creation in the economy are concerned, because textile sector mostly employs less skilled and medium skilled laborers, predominantly women. Also, India has a very well functioned auto and auto component industry, as many global and domestic companies manufacture their cars and two-wheelers in Indian country itself, and then they export them to other markets also. Further, India is also undertaking rapid expansion of its renewable energy commitments, and for that it needs large amount of solar cells. But to fulfill the increased demand of solar cell, India is dependent on imports from China and other countries rather than manufacturing them in our own very country. So this has been the mixed result that the article highlights. Now we will identify what are the reasons for this mixed results. Now the first reason is that the scheme has steep targets. Now, what if a scheme has steep targets, which means only a handful amount of companies will be able to qualify for this scheme and the benefits will be only available to only small amount of large companies, whereas India predominantly has an unorganized and micro, small and medium enterprises sector. So, because of these steep targets, the smaller industries or companies, they are not eligible for the benefits of this scheme. Also, most of the manufacturing setups that have been created after this scheme are slow gestation projects, which means that the time from starting of investment to starting of production is a long duration, which means you cannot expect the production to start from tomorrow if you invest the money today. And this happens mostly in the technology intensive sectors such as auto factories or automobile factories, semiconductor plants. They take several years before coming into production. Also, this scheme has increased India's import dependence. Case in point, mobile phones. Now, most of the mobile phones, they have screens, processors, which are imported from countries such as China, Taiwan, Korea, etc. And India, although produces large amount of mobile phones, but to produce these mobile phones, India needs imports of raw materials also. So, as you can see, India is exporting $15 billion worth of mobiles, but it is also importing large amount of raw materials from other countries, rather than producing them in our own very territory. So, these are the mixed results that the scheme highlights. Now, what should be done in order to make this scheme much more beneficial? First is to have a predefined sunset clause, that although you are extending or providing companies with benefits to undertake production, but this benefit should not be extended throughout the time. Rather, they should only be extended for first few years. That will enable the company to be more competitive, and after that these incentives should be removed and given to another set of companies. And this is what a sunset clause is all about, that only a definite period of incentives should be available to the companies. Further, there is also a need to optimize the outcome, which we have seen that the outcomes have not fruitioned in textile and solar sector, and the outcomes have surpassed in sectors such as pharmaceutical and mobiles. Further, there is also a need to increase the outlay of this scheme. Because as I've already highlighted, industries such as semiconductors, these are capital intensive sectors and requires high amount of investment from any company. So to make investments more attractive, the government can increase the outlay or incentives that are provided to the companies, which will make investment in these sectors more and more attractive. Understood? So I'll expect each and every one of you to answer this practice question that critically evaluate the effectiveness of the production linked incentive scheme in boosting India's domestic manufacturing and employment. Now you can attempt this question after the session ends. Okay. Now let us consider our last article, which I have taken from the Press Information Bureau. That is, this article is on Kisan Credit Card. Now we all know India's farmers are a stressed group of people, that they need money for their daily expenses, be it for their own personal consumption or for their agricultural activities. But this money usually is not available to them from formal sources of credit like banks and NBFCs. So to fulfill their need for credit, they rely often on informal sources of lending like local money lenders. However, these money lenders, they charge high or exorbitant amount of interest rates, which makes farmer more vulnerable to undertake a death trap or a debt trap. So in this regard, back in the late 90s, the government of India, and this idea was brought by the previous finance minister in Indian government, that was Mr. Yashwant Sinha. Now this credit card or Kisan Credit Card is given to farmers with an objective to provide adequate and timely credit for farmers. Now what are the benefits of this scheme? First of all, that this extends a single window loans for a maximum period of 1 year, and the loans that are available to the farmers are given on lesser interest, which is called interest subvention. And also, in case the farmer repays the loan back before the due date, they also are given some sort of an incentive. So the sum total result of this scheme is that these fundings are available to the farmer at as low as 3 to 4% interest per annum, which is quite less as compared to other formal sources of credit, which are available at 8 to 9% interest per annum. Now, it is also important to note that the funds under the Kisan Credit Card are available only on a short-term basis, that is, only for a period of maximum 1 year, which means that the farmers can use this loan to meet short-term credit requirement for cultivation of crops, for post-harvest expenses such as storage and transportation, in produce marketing, in consumption requirement of their own household also, in case farmers have a social obligation like marriage. So they can undertake the loans under Kisan Credit Card scheme for that requirement also. And also they can use this loan to source working capital for maintenance of farm assets and activities allied to agricultural sector as well. Now what are working capital for maintenance of assets? Suppose you have a tractor and you need to undertake the servicing of that tractor. So that servicing requires money, which can also be sourced from Kisan Credit Card. Now the investment credit, which is required for agriculture and allied activities, are also available under this scheme. But you have to note that this investment should be repaid back in the period of 1 year. Now the people who are eligible to get these loans are farmers, both individual and joint borrowers, as well as people who are engaged in animal husbandry, dairying and fisheries related activities. Now this amendment was made recently and the benefits of this scheme are now available to this lot also. Further, the tenant farmers and oral lessees are also eligible, which is not the case, and as these farmers are unable to get loans from formal sources, as well as self-help groups and liability groups of farmers also, which includes groups of tenant farmers as well as sharecroppers also. Understood. So this is what Kisan Credit Card is all about. Now in this regard, let us solve the practice question, and this practice question is actually UPSC's previous year question that appeared in the year 2020. Now under Kisan Credit Card scheme, short-term credit support is given to farmers for which of the following purposes? Now you can understand from this particular slide that the credit which is available to farmers are provided for a short-term period for use of working capital as well as investment credit requirement. Now if you look at the options, you can easily eliminate few options. Now working capital for maintenance of farm assets is correct as the loans for this activity is available. So is the loans for post-harvest expenses as well as consumption requirement. So 1, 3 and 4 is correct. Now let us consider option 2 and 4. Now this is purchase of combine harvester, tractors and mini trucks, which is it a working capital or a fixed capital? It is a fixed capital. Now fixed capital are assets which you use in production, and working capitals are assets such as seeds and inputs which you utilize them in production, and the character of those capital changes, whereas the character of fixed capital remains the same, because tractor this year will remain a tractor next year, right? But seeds this year will change into fruits and vegetables next year. So that is, seeds and vegetables are not fixed, rather working capital. So first is incorrect because this is a fixed capital and it requires large amount of money. So farmers cannot use the credit under Kisan Credit Card scheme to purchase combine harvesters, tractors and mini trucks. Also, construction of family house, setting up of village and storage facility, these are capital investment, also a fixed capital which requires large amount of money, and naturally you cannot repay the money back in 1 year because the money involved here is large. So both second and fifth options are incorrect. So first, third and fourth was correct, hence option B is the correct answer to this practice question. Understood? So this was all for today's session of daily newspaper analysis by studyIQ English, and we will conduct this session on a daily basis, and the notes which are there for this session will be available on this particular Telegram channel, the QR for which is provided here, and I will upload the notes immediately after this session ends. Understood? So I'll take your permission. This was all from my side for today. I'll see you again tomorrow sharp at 10 AM. So I wish you a very good day.